Welcome to another episode of The Vivid Truth. I am here with Jared Greenlease of Hoonigan, formerly Wheel Pros, formerly MHT, formerly entire career of wheels.
Yeah.
So, Jared, we've met recently, and he's got an extensive background in the wheel land. And so I thought I'd bring you on today so we could talk about all things wheels. And obviously, as you're an enthusiast, so talk about, your favorite cars, what you're driving, modding. So, yeah, welcome.
Thanks, Dan. Appreciate it.
Glad to have you here. So, first and foremost, you are the vice president. What's your official title?
So I'm the regional vice president for the West Coast and international sales for the Wheel Pros portion of Hoonigan, right? So Wheel Pros was always the parent company, the parent entity. And back in 2021, we merged with Hoonigan. And as the industry has kind of changed, and we want to be able to relate more to the consumer, we've started using the Hoonigan moniker as our parent company branding, right? Just it's a little bit more relatable to the younger demographic.
So let's go back in time. Let's jump in the way back time machine. How did Jared get here? Where is the enthusiast? What was the first car?
First car was an OBS flare side Chevy, static dropped. Fun. I was still in high school. Actually,
What's OBS?
88 to 98 Chevy, 1500.
Okay.
Yeah, like old school, mini truck stuff.
Okay.
So I was basically a counter critter, like a hangout kid at a local stereo shop called Audio Wizards in Akron. And my mom actually used to drop me off there when I would help out for store credit. Like I was doing dancing in a Santa suit by the side of the road, pitching remote starts. Cause this is Akron, Ohio, right? So from November to March, all you're selling is remote starts and winter tire and wheel packages with the occasional stereo setup. And so long story short, I would show up there all the time. I was always helping clean up the DB drag vehicles back when DB drag was a huge thing. Big car audio guy back in the day. Helping them set up and tear down for car shows and stuff like that. And the owner kind of took a shining to him and he brought me on as the vinyl guy. So this is
vinyl guy,
2000, 2001, right? So we're talking modern image era, Fast and the Furious type stuff.
Okay.
So I was doing side graphics on cars and I was terrible at it.
Oh yeah.
Absolutely awful. And the owner never wanted to fire me because he liked me so much and I was so enthusiastic. God, was I bad at vinyl. So long story short, we had this a sale, just a massive rush one day. And so I was just kind of walking around the sales floor, talking to some customers and just basically trying to keep people entertained while the sales guys were busy. And long and short, I wound up closing a wide body kit, a set of wheels, a nitro setup, and some other stuff for a GST Eclipse.
What year was this?
This would have been 2001, right? So I'm still in high school at the time. And so I went back to the office and grabbed the owner. I'm like, hey, I don't know can somebody write this guy up or take care of this guy? Here's what I sold him. And he's just kind of looking at me and doing the transaction. He's like, oh my God, you can sell. Okay. He's like, no, you don't understand. I needed to fire you. You're terrible at this, but we love you. So starting tomorrow, you're in sales. And so that was that, man. From that day forward, I would, drive my body kitted Dodge Neon to high school every day. Oh, dude. Yeah. First car build.
Hold on a second though. Let's go back to the Chevy.
Okay.
Well, they had, I think this must've been, let's call it 2002, 2003. They had it wasn't a Silverado though. Was it an S10? Oh
yeah.
They had one factory with a kit on there, right?
Oh, the Chevy Extremes. Absolutely.
Was that what it was?
Yeah. It was factory lowered 2-wheel drive, had that aero kit on it.
Yeah. So I don't want to admit this, but I think there was a time that 2001 is when we started, but I actually remember thinking that I wanted to get one of those. I was going to go trade my Acura Integra in for this Chevy because there was a kid that we'd go down to Pecos. So if you're not from here, or if you are from here, there's the 202 freeway that now runs around the mountain to the 10. Well, that was just a 2-lane road and it stopped at the Indian reservation. But they'd always have the drags. Everywhere they have drags. So that's where kids went out. And this kid had this S10, and I'd go out and race him on Pecos once in a while in my Integra. Okay. Integra LS with VTEC badge, just so you can identify the horsepower. And I thought that thing was cool. So I remember going to the dealer and checking those things out. But so it was the S10 Extreme package.
Yeah. Yeah. The 4.3 Vortec V6 in it. It was a cool truck.
I don't think it had that. Maybe it did. Yeah, I don't know.
So yeah, back when you get into like the 98 to, was it like 03-ish? It was either the 2.4 liter, which fun fact, you could use the naturally aspirated Mitsubishi Eclipse air intakes on. And I sold the hell out of those. Or it came with the 4.3 V6.
Maybe it was the V6. Okay. So fast forward, Dodge Neon.
Yeah, so basically I put that truck into a tree and then a telephone pole, right? Out in the rain one day, just messing around with my buddies, and I was just spinning the tires off, and the thing caught traction. And I went nose first into a tree, swung the back end, and L'd the truck into a telephone pole. So it was done.
No vinyl to fix that.
No vinyl to fix that. It was like a Choo-Choo Customs truck that was lowered. It was a very cool truck. It was originally my dad's, so I kind of broke his heart when I totaled this thing. So my parents thought the best thing to do would be to take my money and get me into something safe and slow and reliable. So I wound up going and buying this Dodge Neon. And within 90 days, it was full body kit, like Enki Shuriken wheels. If you remember those big, crazy directional wheels, massive, like 4-foot spoiler on the back, full body kit, Kaminari hood.
Is this, Kaminari hood. I had one on my WRX. Yeah. Was it, man, we could just start visuals everywhere.
Oh, Nopi Nats days, man. It was such a cool time for the car culture.
This is going good. I went to Nopi Nationals in 2005.
Okay.
Out there. And that's where they had the Nopi helicopter. Like they flew their helicopter.
Yes.
And I stayed on, what was that, Georgia, the raceway?
Mm-hmm.
So, and they had condos, right? They had condos, places you could actually stay up there. Yeah. And I stayed in there with Jared Deanda.
Okay.
Zach Luke at Rockford. And
Jared, the FD guy?
Yeah.
Nice. Okay.
Yeah, this is way before he's the FD guy. And Zach, do you know Zach Luke from Rockford?
I've met Zach. I don't know him super well.
Super cool guy. So, and did that. And yeah, we stayed right up there and went down to it. I mean, that was one of the hugest things I've ever been to in my life. Like people would drive in from states. You know, we would drive to a California show. People from the entire East Coast and Midwest would go to this thing.
100%. So for us, because again, I'm from Akron, Ohio originally, right? Like Rubber City, the home of Goodyear, Firestone, all that. So for us, the big event was Carlisle. But a lot of guys with
That's Pennsylvania?
Correct. Yeah, the Carlisle did they had a mini truck nat show, they had a vintage show, and the big one for the longest time was the Carlisle Sport Compact show. But then we would have a lot of guys that would make it down to Nopi too. At this point, I was 17, 18 years old, right? So I never got a chance to go down to Nopi at that point. I was always doing Carlisle and never got to the actual Nopi event. But at this point, right, so we're talking just pre the first Fast and the Furious coming out. I'm driving this full body kitted Dodge Neon with nitrous. Crazy.
And Kaminari hood.
And Kaminari hood with the crazy directional wheels, like super heavy, like insanely slow. But we put nitrous on the car. And again, we're talking 2001. So I had fiberglass the dash and dropped a 5.2-inch monitor into the dash, and I had a PS1 in the glove box.
5.2-inch, and this is 2004?
2001.
2000. How thick was that monitor?
Oh, dude, it was every bit of 2 inches thick.
Yeah, I don't even think I can't even think of that stuff they had back then. Because even in my 2002 WRX first car I had the screen that came out of the head unit and flipped up.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, yeah, for point of reference, remember the old the old Pioneer that had the Dolphins?
Yes.
So I had that radio, and we used the aux in on that for the audio from the PlayStation, and then the video up to the monitor.
There was a PlayStation in the car too?
Yeah, PS1. Like the little tiny baby PS1 sitting in the glove box. So I'm driving this thing to high school, right? Like that was my prom car, my graduation car. And I'm working at the stereo shop at the time. And then the first Fast and the Furious movie comes out. Did that for a while, loved working for those guys. And then fast forward like the Too Fast, Too Furious time zone. Now at this point, we're doing just VIS racing and versus body kits like crazy.
Same shop?
Same shop for about 4 years. And then Too Fast, Too Furious, like that whole time frame hit. So this is pre-social media, pre-influencer. We put together this impromptu cruising car show at a drive-in movie theater for the premiere of Too Fast, Too Furious. And so we wound up having like 200 cars and mini trucks for the premiere of this movie. Just a wild night, right? Stuff that people pay thousands of dollars to put together today. We did with some flyers we made at FedEx Kinko's. And it was just a killer crazy time.
Or Alpha Graphics is what we had here. You'd have to go there and you'd bring them a CD-ROM or CD that had the graphic on there, and then you have to negotiate. Is it going to be 25 cents a flyer or 10 cents a flyer? And then, God forbid, you wanted color.
So I took the first one in when I did the flyers for this thing. It was on a 3.5-inch floppy disk.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, brought that in. It was just black and white. They printed on a bunch of like random neon colors. And again, Akron was a decent sized city, but it wasn't a massive like major metro. So we were just like hanging out at car shows, hanging out at the local Starbucks down at the Strip in Canton, and just passing out flyers to kids. And about 200 guys and gals showed up. It was awesome, man.
So we go from the big heavy Inkies and then Dodge Neon to what's next what's the next car?
I followed that up with TSI Talent.
You know, I was just talking to someone the other day, and they were saying how much they would love to get another one of those all-wheel drive Eclipse or Talons, because
I feel like they don't remember how many problems they had with their last one.
That's what I was going to say to him, because I don't even know if you could find. It's not like finding a 90s air-cooled Porsche or something like that. Like those cars, there's definitely not some guy that's kept his bones stock.
No, they've all been molested to death at this point.
Yes, terrible.
But so I had a 2GA car, right? So it was a 7-bolt, no journal bearing on the crankshaft. So I used to spit crankshafts out like I was mad at them. Car made great power when it ran, but it ran for 3 months and then was down for 6, like consistently. But it was an absolute riot. You know, when you're building an 11-second street car that you bought for $3,500 and you're pulling junkyard motors and throwing in $500 motors over and over again, dude, it was a great time to be alive.
So what's the difference between the Eclipse? Because that's the 4G6.
Same thing, 4G63, right? So you've got the 1Gs, like the flip-up headlight cars, was the 1GA, and that was a 6-bolt. Those things had a journal bearing on the crankshaft. And then you've got the 1GBs. That was kind of like the sweet spot car where it had the stationary headlights in the first-generation body, and that had the 6-bolt motor still, but it had a 4-bolt rear end. So the rear ends held together way better. Versus the first gen had like a 3-bolt, and they snapped. You get into the second gens, like all the better looking cars, they all had that 7-bolt, and then they took out the journal bearing on the crankshaft on the 4G63s, and they would just throw cranks out the side of the block anytime you made good power.
Who was the big tuners in that market, in the Eclipse market?
That's interesting, right? So being from like the Akron Canton area, I was actually surrounded by the big guys. So Dave Busher Racing was right up the way. Yeah. John Shepard from Shep Transmission was literally 6 blocks from me. So those were kind of the big guys, you know, for us in that market.
Well, those guys jumped into the whole, you know, Evo 8 era as soon as that car hit.
They hit the Evo era, and then most of those guys wound up in the GTR era too.
Yeah, I don't even think some of them are still around, are they?
So Busher actually sold. There's a company in Cincinnati now that owns the rights to the Busher name. Shep Trans is still a thing. They're building like V10 Huracan and R8 Trans now, which is how you're making power these days.
Yeah.
And then Tim Schweitzer used to work for Dave Busher. So
yeah.
Fun story about Tim, because Tim was from the same like Cleveland area too, right? I had tuned my car myself using an old Apexi SAFC2.
Oh God, Mitch and I were just talking about that. On the last one.
The piggyback era, man. And I had a wideband, an AM wideband, and tuning that thing, and I could not get the car to run right. So I took the car to Tim Schweitzer, and Tim did a full leak down. He had just opened Schweitzer Performance Innovation. Like he had just moved from Evos and started getting big into the GTR scene. And this guy is such a mad scientist. And if Tim hears this, God love you, man. Shout out. One of the best tuners I've ever had the privilege of getting to know. Turns out I had a missized injector, like out of the box from Venom at the time. Tim figured this out not by bench testing, not by flowing the injectors. He put his ear to the fuel rail
just to hear it go,
and he could hear one that wasn't firing correctly, and pulled him out, threw him on the bench. Lo and behold, we had one of them that was missized. And so, but I mean, just the mad scientist, like crazy skill set that guy had.
He was huge in the big 6-speed online days. He was building these big GT2, like 997, 996.
Yes, yeah, huge power Porsche.
There's I remember on 6-speed online, there was a lot of guys that had some big money in that area.
Oh yeah,
because he was getting some customers. Like, dude, you're in Ohio, right? You know,
cost of living was nothing, man.
Yeah, he was doing some big power Porsches. I think he actually reached out to me about some wholesale stuff here, which maybe within the last year. And so he has something else going on now. It's not under Switzer, but there was something that was going on. But he's still doing it. He's still out there.
So 100%. And we lost touch about the time his wife passed away.
Oh,
which absolutely devastating. cancer, I believe, but I may be misspeaking.
Yeah,
I believe. But so for a while, he was actually tuning for AMS.
Okay.
Just he wanted to step into like a little bit more relaxed role so he could focus on his family.
Yeah.
And then he was also importing, if you remember June stuff, like back in the big Honda days.
Yeah, yeah.
He was the U.S. import contact for June for a while. Tim was.
Wow. Yeah, we've had June stuff for quite a while.
Now that's like 2002, 2003s, like right when he first left Busher. He was handling the June stuff.
So just a little bit.
Yeah.
Okay. So you built a 11-second streetcar.
11-second streetcar.
Eagle Talon, and you were this guy's number one salesman, selling all of the best. Was it Wings West?
So this is pre VIS owning Wings West. So I was doing a ton of VIS racing and Versus Motorsport, like cheap fiberglass.
I thought Wings
kits.
West was more OG than VIS.
So Wings West was more OG, but it was more premium too, because they were like the first urethane body kit company, right? So if you had money, you bought Wings West. If you wanted weird, wild, and crazy, and like the $6.99 body kit, that was the VIS Racing Sports or the Versus Motorsport stuff.
I don't think people understand how not good quality that stuff.
Oh my God. If they didn't have it in stock for your Integra, it's fine. Order it for a Cavalier. You're going to do the same amount of cutting and sanding. It does not matter.
Yeah, no, if they had Yelp and Google reviews for those body kits back then, the abuse that those companies would have never lasted. But people did it because there wasn't the options.
The amount of Dremel bits I went through putting those things on back in the day, right? Just trying to fit and shim stuff.
Now there's definitely a customer for those. So right now you've got Extreme Dimensions, who has their Duraflex, Carbon Creations, and as much as I sometimes am against that, because you can't just only have a premium customer. There's enthusiasts for all walks of life, right? Is we sell a lot of that stuff.
Sure.
And there are people that are plenty happy with it. I think it's the expectations, but yeah. And back then I don't think you had to set expectations. You just said, here's what you get. But some of that stuff, requires some extra work, but then some of it is good. I mean, a friend of mine has a supercharged Gallardo. He needed a new carbon rear fuser, sold it to him, boom, slapped it on. Right. So some of that stuff's decent.
Well, one of the things you got to keep in mind too, is we're talking, early to mid 2000s when those garbage body kits, and they are exactly what they are. Right. And the same time we were doing those big metal wings and they were universal metal wings, I was buying the thing. I'll throw it out there now because we're 25 years. I don't think anybody's coming back to get me at this point. But I was buying those things at $29 a piece and selling them at $299 installed.
Jesus.
I was welding on $19 mufflers for $199, right? And we couldn't keep stuff in stock. We were going through pallets upon pallets in a stereo shop in Akron, Ohio. At this point in time, the business was actually called Audio Wizards because all we did originally was car audio. And we got to the point where I think car audio is 10 to 15% of our business because we're eating, sleeping, and breathing wheels, body kits, and bolt-on basic performance stuff.
Please tell me this is like the number one aftermarket accessory company in the world now from all that hard work.
So fun stuff. So fun fact, the owners actually just came out here for Barrett Jackson, the old owners of Audio Wizards. We've been friends for so long. They went to my high school graduation. Eric and Ann, shout out, because I know they'll watch this if I post it. Shout out to Eric and Ann, Autosport Plus, Canton, Ohio. One of the best retailers in the business. So they opened up a new shop. I actually helped them open it up in 2000 and Christmas 2005, so 2006. It's called Autosport Plus in Canton, Ohio. They sold the business off for a while. I went to go work for a company called Horizon Motorsports. Decent company.
So that's still around. The name sounds familiar.
It is. It's still around. It's gone through ownership changes. Back in the day, Horizon Audio and Horizon Motorsports was like the premier retailer in the Ohio, Pennsylvania area.
Well, everything was so much more localized. You
100%.
didn't do as much e-commerce as you do now.
Well, there was zero e-com back then, right?
Right.
You were dialing up to AOL if you had AOL. Yeah. Back then my laptop had one of those X jacks. You push the side and you plugged a phone cord into the side of your laptop in this little tray.
Yeah, don't be on the phone when I'm trying to use dial-up.
Oh yeah, or you're 98% finished downloading a song that took you 3 hours, and then your brother picks up the phone, and all of a sudden you lose everything he just did. And so I spent some time at Horizon, and Eric and Ann wound up opening up Autosport Plus, and that shop is still there. The kid that I hired as my sales assistant is still running the place 20 years later. Most of their staff is still the same people, and yeah, they're huge. They're Ohio's premier retailer now.
That's cool.
Oh, it's awesome. Great people, great business model, great work ethic. And honestly, Eric is where I got my profit be damned, we're going to make it right mentality, right? Like you don't have to worry about the net profit of this transaction. You take care of this guy if something goes wrong, and you'll have a customer for life. And I learned that from those people.
That's actually a very good moniker. I like that. I'm going to save that. I'm going to write that down and replay this. So at what point, what would you say that your transition into the wheel world started?
So I was always, even going to work at the stereo shop, right? I just kind of gravitated towards wheel sales. Like that was just something that I always got into because ticket value, let's call it what it is, right? But more importantly, it's the best way to dress up a car. It's the best way to simplify and add lightness to something you're trying to make power on. Like you're trying to track a Miata, what's the first thing you do? Add a set of Flowform wheels, right? Lighten it up, increase braking ability, increase the cornering ability. The car's not making any power, so you've got to find a way to make it more agile. You go through, and the time I spent at Autosport Plus was fantastic. But I was approached by a wholesaler in the time. It was Terry's Tire Town, which sounds like this generic little thing, but we were actually a $250 million a year wholesaler. We were later gobbled up by American Tire Distributors.
Okay.
So I was approached by Terry's to come and sell wheels for their wholesale program. And so I went and I did that. And then I wound up kind of being the guy there for wheels, right? We had a bunch of guys that did accessories because we also offered like truck stuff, tonneau covers, stuff like that.
And you had to know all of these offsets and fitments from experience.
100%.
One of those guys that you could just be like, hey, I need a set of wheels for a Mazda 626. And you just know.
So I
don't know if you know 626, but
100%.
No way.
Come on, man.
A 626?
So I used to daily a 323.
All right.
And I had one of the 323 GTXs, the all-wheel drive turbo 323s back in the day.
Okay.
Yeah, it was weird Mazda nerd. I did some time with like a Mazda Speed 3 and had a couple cool Miatas we can talk about later too. I should say one really cool Miata with a couple of different iterations of it. But so back then, right, there wasn't a lot of online resources for anything. Right? So I used to literally take the Red Book home and study that thing like I had homework. And I got to the point where I just learned how everything kind of functioned and flowed together. And the wheel program was a very small part of Terry's business. We were a $250 million a year tire distribution company, which coming out of Alliance, Ohio was a big deal. And
that's still a good volume today.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But of that, I would say, I don't have the hard numbers, but it was 15, maybe 20 million in wheel sales, right? So good margin compared to what a tire's profit margin looks like, but it was a relatively small part of the business, but it was the fun part of the business. So I wound up becoming the lead sales guy there, and eventually I became the head of the program. So I was doing our catalog layout. I actually owned our URL for our website because I couldn't get IT to make the spend for the company. So I made the spend. It was actually always my running joke. You guys will know if you fire me because
off.
Oh, better yet, I'll just put something awful on there.
Oh,
and
yeah.
Every single customer for every catalog you've printed is going to have a lick. So like my face giving you the finger.
Let me go to Terry's Tire. Why is meat spin on there? We can say that here. There's no HR.
Oh, so fun fact, right? Actually, Terry's and Meat Spin's a really funny story. On my last day there, one of my favorite coworkers, a guy named TJ Jones, awesome dude, ex-Marine, great family guy, but he had a really dark sense of humor. So I went into his computer the night before and I set meatspin.com as his default like browser page. And I'd totally forgotten about it. Apparently he hadn't gotten on the internet till like noon. All of a sudden I hear that, "You spin my head right." And he just goes dead silent on his phone call. And our CEO walks in at that moment because it was my last day to come up and say goodbye as this meat's just spinning on his desktop.
That obviously solved that problem right there.
They were quick, but you know what? They were quick to hire me back. So I moved to Florida and I went to work for a company called Star Wheel, which is now like hardcore off-road. Shout out to Chris Starr because I know Chris will watch this too.
Hardcore, yes.
Yeah, so hardcore off-road, Star Wheel, Rockstar Alloys, F and Alloy Group, the big Crum stuff. We were doing like 32s on Camaros.
The Alabama specials down there.
100%. Yeah. Big crazy donk stuff. And I loved working with that customer base because those guys did not give a damn. If it did not fit, they would find a way to make it.
Oh, and the price of the wheels compared to the price of the vehicle.
Oh, 100%.
Yeah. Most of the people I feel like we deal with, it's very conscious to like, well, here's my car. How much am I spending on my car because it's this value?
Oh, yeah. No, I would sell $10,000 30s to $3,500 Crown Vic.
Yes.
All day, every day.
That's awesome.
And I loved that customer base. Those guys were awesome. They were so much fun because they would just find a way to cut it and make it work. And then they'd send you a bunch of cool pictures of it, right? So I spent some time down there in Miami. And the following SEMA, the guys from Terry's actually convinced me to come back. So we moved from Miami back to Ohio and took over the wheel program again. And we did that for a while. And then ATD gobbled us up. And we became a part of the, the big guy, the evil empire, so to speak.
I think, because I was just looking for some tire stuff, and I can cut this if we need to. I think ATD just filed bankruptcy.
They did. And, it's not the first time. They filed a couple times. Okay. There are some great folks that work at ATD.
Yeah.
But it's a really weird business model.
Tire business doesn't make sense to me unless you're Discount Tire or Tire Rack, or now they are the same, because, half the time you get, we wholesale tires through Discount forever, had great data from them, resources, but a Falcon tire, an FK, what was it, 452 or whatever it was, right?
Great tire, by the way.
Yeah. Your cost, $60. Retail, $67.
100%.
And it was like, how do you even make money in this stuff?
So for us, and this is where, like here at Wheel Pros Hoonigan, this is where, to us, we sell tires, and we sell a lot of tires, don't get me wrong. But tires are a mechanism to help us sell more wheels.
Yeah, I mean, you've got to have that product in general that just captures, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the wheel by itself does you no good. So
right.
That's where and thankfully we have great partnerships with Nita, with Mickey Thompson, with Toyo, even with Falcon. Our relationship with Falcon has ebbed and flowed over the years, but overall they've been a great partner and they do some really cool stuff. But that's also why we're so limited on the brands that we offer, right? Because the margins are so thin. At the end of the day, we're a wheel company, first and foremost. We're a design house, manufacturer, and distributor. Everything else is just to help us get more wheels out the door.
So ATD, you're there, got gobbled up, and you went and did.
So I was regional for ATD, right? So I had 15 distribution centers, basically Detroit, Michigan, all the way down to Alabama, and all the way over and into the Northeast.
Were you still driving the Dodge?
So no. So at this point,
just making sure.
No.
You've gone quite well in your career. I just want to make sure you decide to leave that Dodge.
I also went through a pretty gnarly divorce at that point. So I went from a new A4 down to an FA5 four-door Civic.
Okay.
A Civic Si, which honestly
FA5
07 was the first year of the four-door SIs.
Oh yeah. Man, those, I remember me working at the pizza place in 97, how dope those original, the first SIs we got with the sticker on the side said like SI VTEC. You had the red or that blue color one.
Oh, you're talking like the EM1s. EM1. So the 99 2000s.
Yeah, those.
Dude, those cars, first of all, seeing those cars with historic plates on them hurts my soul.
So old.
Oh my God. I was at Planet Fitness in Gilbert the other day, and there was a DC2 Integra with historical plates, and I died inside.
That can't be. I feel like historical has to be like the entire car is still made of like tank steel and the size of a tank.
I hear you, but the thing was built in 94. We're in 2024.
I get the 25 years, but I feel like historic cars should stay at like 1980 and before.
So part of me wants to agree with you, but as a car guy coming up, right? And I actually have a really cool story about like kind of the transition where I'm from, because I'm from like the birthplace of Summit Racing. The original Summit facility was 10 minutes from my house. And so that was like a hot rod mecca, right? And so coming up as a sport compact guy in that area, all of the shows, all of the events were like vintage hot rod stuff. And there was this place in Akron called the Corral. And they had this sandwich called the Nightmare Burger. It had ham on it and an onion ring. And it was the most god-awful, artery-clogging, delicious thing you've ever put in your face, right? But every Sunday they'd have like a vintage car cruising. And so me and a couple of my buddies would always go up, and we'd always kind of like park towards the back, right? Because you're driving like, that Neon or a Civic, or I had my buddy Ryan had a turbocharged ZX2 Escort, if you remember those things.
Okay, yeah.
And so we kind of parked to the back and just kind of like walk around, wander around. And you had the occasional guy that didn't want the tuner kids there. But for the most part, the amount of love and acceptance and the amount of questions and conversations we had with the vintage hot rod guys, because I mean, let's be honest, like no one's building another Nova. Like this was the future of the industry.
Yeah, that's the heart. That's where you die inside, because it's hard to realize that we are now those older guys. We were driving yesterday, and there was one of those, like 32 Roadster type cars, with the whole, there's no front to it. It's like a giant grill. There's the exposed engine. And then like a tin cup, the guy's sitting and driving. Yeah. And my kids are like
old tea bucket.
Yeah. My kids are like, what the hell is that? Right. They're surrounded by Porsches and all this other stuff. And those guys, they're dead. Like Barrett Jackson is now the 90s cars.
100. Yeah.
I mean, that's what Barrett Jackson is like. You'll still have those Novas and Camaros and stuff. It'll take a while, but pretty soon you're going to see crossing the line, a DC2 Integra with 20,000 miles sell for $100,000 or something silly.
That
will blow your mind when it happens.
Well, and if I think about the number of DC2 Integras or EM1 Civics that I destroyed that could have paid for me to retire. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So anyways, car show, cruising, where you were at.
Oh yeah, just so that was kind of the cool transition, right? Like the community was, and that's one thing that I think the community lacks today, the culture lacks today. There was this open-minded sense of curiosity from the vintage guys to the tuner kids and vice versa. And today, I think a lot of that has, and I think social media is in a big part of this. You don't get as much open-minded curiosity that you used to get when you would go to car shows and events, right? You don't see mini trucker guys talking to sport compact kids about why they do things the way they do things. Or if you think let's think 2002, 2003, right? And we'll talk about the sex spec era of builds, where all of the JDM tuner guys were starting to get really into mini trucking culture. And all of a sudden you'd have 18-inch, 19-inch, super full-face chrome niche wheels on a bagged or on hydraulic, like a Cord wagon with crazy airbrushing up the side. And you had this whole just blending of all of these different cultures, building really cool cars and making for a really interesting scene. And today it's a lot more compartmentalized.
Yeah, I think it is compartmentalized. I think some of the cars that have built have slightly merged the cultures. If you look at what the new Mustang owner is or the new Corvette C8 owner is, and that's just, I think, who has the cars, or maybe it's the dollars that people now have to spend on cars. So they look at things a little bit different than before because you're actually having to mod and build cars, I feel like. Where now, it literally is a C8 owner is no longer what a Corvette owner was.
Not even close. Yeah. We've just had this conversation at the office. A C8 guy is a C8 guy. He's not a Corvette guy. He's not the C5, C6. This is a 1 of 100 because it's this shade of red with this tan interior that was built on a Thursday. Kind of under.
But we're so jaded by also what we see on social media too, because it's every kid. When you were 20 years old, you had a Neon. When I was, or you had the truck before that. I had my mom's 91 Honda Accord. Now these kids, 20 years old, I'm a Facebook marketing specialist and I drive a Urus. So it's I think you see a lot of this, these people that give it seems like, okay, this is what they all are. So maybe that does exist in a smaller aspect. I think social media kind of hides that because there's not as much of the meeting, having those meet and greets that you see.
So once upon a time, and I'm talking 90s, 2000s, really up into the 20, I would say go as far as the early 2010s. Car guys and car gals were hardcore enthusiasts, right? Today, there is just as much clout chasing as there is actual hardcore enthusiasm.
Yeah, what car did you buy to? Yeah, I know. I've noticed that a lot too. Is there's some people even I follow, and it seems like every month you have a new car, just to show that, hey, now I have this car because it's a hot car. Look how I went and bought this car because I'm 20 years old and I own 6 cars, right?
Right, but you don't care about that car. You don't. The car doesn't inspire joy.
No, you didn't name the car. You didn't, go out there and sand weld, paint, whatever to modify it. You usually had a car and you would build that thing up over 2, 3, 4 years. Took a while.
So post Talon and then pre my first Audi, I had an EJ6, which was a 98 Civic that was B18, B20, Frankenstein hybrid, Greddy bolt-on turbo kit, and then NX direct port nitrous injected, right? Loved this car. It was, again, this was an 1180 street tire on a Integra Type R trans, so super short gearing. It was a great, around, light to light road car. Absolutely awful on the highway. You're 6 gear at 80 miles an hour. You're at 6,200 RPM. Just, but God, was that car fun. But I was such a nerd for that car that I bought another silver EX just so I had a parts car if something went wrong with my cool car. So I'd be driving in the middle of winter in Ohio, missing a fender because I needed that fender to fix my turbo car, right? And you don't have, I guess, that level of love and passion today from as many enthusiasts. It's definitely still there. It's just when you look at the car culture as a whole, back in the day, you didn't really care as much about what other people thought about your build.
That's where those people are. Those enthusiasts still exist. They're just not sitting there every day showing
Exactly.
some on social media.
100%, right? And you definitely still have that guy or that gal. And I say gal because I'm actually, especially here in Phoenix, I'm seeing a lot more true enthusiast female builders.
And I mentioned that on the podcast I did with Slicker, is there's a lot more females that you see, because it used to be where you would come across a female in the car industry and you're just like
weird.
What's going on? Like, let me grab this one, right? Now there's so many of them, and that's actually part of a good part of maybe social media, because not that they can't do this stuff, but you're actually seeing like, hey, look, they're just as much part of,
and it's more widely accepted now too. And I think social media has a big part to do with that, right?
Yeah.
So there's definitely pros with the cons.
Yeah.
Like there's a local group here in Phoenix.
Lady Driven.
No, I was talking actually about a bunch of young girls. They go by DAS Babes, like DAS Babes.
Okay. Your feed's different than mine, by the way.
Well, so I, long story short, I got connected with these girls and I basically like tried to set them up with like a deal on Rotiform, because with our Rotiform brand, it's all about grassroots, right? It's about guys and gals who are at car shows, at events, going to cars and people who dig the scene, right?
Right.
And I actually got connected with them because there's one young lady in that group who drives a bagged A3 on a set of cast Rotiform wheels. And that came up in my FYP page. And I'm like, oh, that's perfect. And she's local. And a couple of clicks later, I had a conversation with her and I got connected with the girl that runs their club. And, but seeing like a whole like troop of girls who were legitimately into it, going to shows and events. You didn't see that kind of stuff back in the 90s and 2000s. It was very much a boys club. Yeah. So it's really cool to see that all opening up a lot more.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree with that. I think you still have the little stigmas of certain females in the car. There's a lot of the models.
Sure.
There's those, but I feel like there definitely is more, I don't want to call them wrenching on stuff or something, but they're more a part of that culture, and it is definitely cool to see. I feel like we're talking about, like 1950s, like stop cooking in the kitchen. Like it's, it's like females and cars, they go hand in hand, right? But it's a great thing to see like everybody. And that's one thing that I can say about selling all different types of products is it's like at the end of the day, an enthusiast is an enthusiast, right? And so you should be able to hang out with the guy that has his Ferrari as he has his Subaru and talk cars, because you're both doing something the same. There's not one wheel that looks the same. There's not one exhaust. I mean, they're all different parts, but it's what makes enthusiast culture cool is you can make it your own.
And so it's interesting, right? And I hate to jump forward in time a little bit, but I want to talk about my current build. And there's a reason I want to talk about that, because it's very much late 90s, early 2000s inspired build, in my new R8. I've got a bagged, it's a 2022 bagged rear wheel drive twin turbo R8. Big carbon arrow, back bumper deleted like an absolute chachi hot boy. But you know what? It pulls out the coolest conversations with the tuner kids. And that leads me down the path of talking about like, what I was doing in the 90s, what I was doing in the 2000s, what we were building then, and how it just creates great conversations about, as much as the culture has changed, it's all exactly the same at the same time. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. No, it's definitely still the same. You end up with the like fads. And
yes.
So the fad could be is owning this type of car, or the fad could be, our big thing when we started was JDM. Like that was us. Like we were in the JDM world of Subarus and Evos and that stuff. And
sourcing Stanley headlights for like EJ Civics. Absolutely.
Yeah. We were bringing in MR JDM Evo 7 headlights like it was our job.
Yes.
Or even on my own where I had the STI JDM headlights, and you didn't care that it was for a right-hand drive car and the beam went the wrong way. It's like you just wanted that look,
Trying to get the city lights to work, and they were that weird shade of blue.
Yeah. Way before Morimoto, or any of those lights. So the current build is the Audi R8.
Yes.
And just talk a little bit about that some more.
So I bought this. This was my 40th birthday gift to myself, right?
I remember those years.
No, you're right. It was just one of those things where it's like at the time, 2022 was going to be the last year of the V10. So of course they did a 23, and then they did a 24, and then they did a GT. So all of a sudden the car wasn't special.
But the car's done though. They're done with the V10s.
The V10 is done, correct.
Yeah.
So Lamborghini has replaced it, and the Huracan has been replaced with the Temerario. I think I'm probably butchering the pronunciation of that.
Right.
But it's the V8 twin turbo hybrid. The original succession plan for the R8 was an electric supercar. And Audi and Volkswagen have already started to pivot away from their big EV push because they've realized that consumers don't want it.
No.
There's nothing. You have a segment of enthusiasts who are truly into EV stuff. And a lot of those guys are into it for the right reason because there is really cool tech. They can make a ton of power. And there's actually some really cool like Model 3s doing like JDM inspired aero and performance and suspension setups and stuff like that.
Yeah, there's a place for EVs, but at the end of the day,
it got shoved down your throat, right? And that's the biggest thing.
Yeah.
As a petrol nerd, right? Like like where I come from, and again, this is like the Akron, Canton, Ohio thing. You knew it was spring when you could smell turbo blue in the air, right? Like we didn't do emissions south of Summit County. So everybody registered their car at their uncle's house or their grandparents' house, or thankfully my parents moved south into Stark County. So there was no e-check, no emissions. So you knew it was March. You knew it was the first warm weekend when every gas station that had race gas had a line down and around the block, and guys were gassing up with Turbo Blue 104 ready to rock and roll. And, that to me, it doesn't matter how fast, like the new Tesla Roadster, my boss has had one on order, one of the Founders Edition cars for 2 years now. And I'm sure it will be faster than my R8.
Of course.
But it's not going to sound as cool.
No.
And it's not going to terrify me the way my R8 terrifies me, right? And there's just something about a car that wants to kill you that it sparks joy, right? Like I get that stupid toddler grin on my face every time I hear the wastegates open up and the car kicks out from under me from a dig. And, there's just something about plugging in my car when I go home that to me, it doesn't do it.
I've done both sides of those. Obviously I had a 2020 Porsche Taycan Turbo, one of the first ones.
Beautiful car.
Fast, tech, great, everything. But at the time, zero infrastructure. You could not go to Tesla. You had to find Electrify America, so you couldn't take that on a road trip. Depending on where you're located, unfortunately in Arizona, it's not, if you're on the East Coast, you can go through 6 states in an hour. It's totally different than being out here. But then, I have that Ford Cosworth, the Escort RS Cosworth.
Oh, beautiful.
93, but I was just talking about, I should sell everything and buy a car. But when I get in it, it smells like the cloth of a 90s car.
Yes.
I go to drive it, and as soon as it starts hitting boost, it just makes all types of noises that maybe I'm going fast, maybe I'm not, but it sounds fast.
The clunks, the creaks, there's just a soul to that, right? And so my Miata was a perfect example of this. I had an NC Miata. It was caged, it was like 17 by 9s and 245s in all four corners because it was rolled and pulled. And originally it had the Kraftwerk supercharger on the 2-liter. Skunked the 2-liter and wound up doing a 2.5-liter Ford swap and retrofitting the supercharger onto it. So this thing was like 400 horsepower in an NC Miata. And it just made awful noises. It wanted to kill you every time.
Terrifying.
It was terrifying, and it was joy-inducing, right? It was a euphoric experience. You didn't have to turn the steering wheel. You just put your foot into it, and boom, you're going left now. And there's just something about older builds. You get into like 80s builds, 90s builds. And I love seeing this resurgence of like vintage JDM cars being built again, right? I was at a Cars and Coffee over the weekend, and a kid pulled in with an old, like the Black Widow style, kind of like wide body CRX, like an 88 to 91 CRX. God, that thing made me happy. Like I'm here for it, man.
The CRX was like it's like you weren't even getting the right car for your birthday. You got that thing. It's like, I got a CRX. It was just, but now it's, that's
dude. Yeah. And it was a great, fun fact, there was a great DB drag cars back in the day too, because they had the sunroofs. Structurally, they were so solid that you could make a ton of noise in those things with very little modification. But the cars were cool. They all rusted in the exact same spot in the rear quarters, right? So everybody learned how to do Bondo on the rear of a CRX. But I love seeing those old, noisy, to your point, they all have a certain smell. It's like it's like any mid-90s Chevy. Like you get into like a Camaro or like a Pontiac Firebird, and the leather has such a distinct 90s GM smell.
It's got to be the material because, I have the 1990 964 as well, and it, of course, has aftermarket carpet kit and the Recaros and stuff. It doesn't smell like that Cosworth, the 93. So it's got to be that factory cloth or leather they put in there. Somehow, it's probably soaked in something that we don't know.
But and it's probably it's probably asbestos, and it's probably killing us, right?
Yeah.
But again, that smell inspires joy, right? Like
that's why I put a Prop 65 sticker on my car, because I love it, but I just, in case it's going to cause cancer, I just want to make sure everyone knows, Prop 65. So this R8, it's got twin turbos on there.
Yes.
How many of the ponies does it?
So we're still going through the tune process right now. It's sort of a hodgepodge of a build, right? We did a B-Rogue manifold, B-Rogue intercoolers, B-Rogue like interchiller exchanger up front, which is pretty gnarly looking. But we decided to change away from B-Rogue typically does comp turbos, which are self-lubricating and air-cooled. Now, don't get me wrong. A lot of guys out here have great success with those turbos.
Do you have to build the motor to run those, or you just run it? Because I know in the supercharger kits, you technically don't.
Right. No, stock block they'll take it up to 1600. It will let go.
The stock engine will take up to
1600.
Oh, wow.
If you know much about like the Audi 5-cylinders, the V10s and the R8 and the Huracan is basically two of the 5-cylinders sandwiched together. I mean, it is damn near bulletproof. I always celebrate to have the Honda Civic of supercars because the aftermarket support is great and you can just throw power at it till it gets sick on you. But so like, yeah, the comp turbos in the B-Rogue kit, they're proven. They do a great job. Actually, my buddy Jared Copperas out here has on Rotiform wheels once again, but he's got I believe it's the world's fastest R8 Spider on a B-Rogue setup with comp turbos. He's in the 200 mile an hour club. I think his peak was 204 or 206. Yeah, probably butchering
in
that,
a half mile.
Yeah.
Wow.
But in a Spider, a non-cage Spider.
Yeah.
So that's absolutely terrifying. Right?
That's got to be terrifying. I was actually, when I was talking to Mitch about this, is because, when I had a McLaren 12C, just, full exhaust tune, and I did the half mile event and ran 168. And that was pretty fast for just a stock car. And trying to stop at that power, because you only have this much runway to stop, is crazy. And then we got into talking about how one of his customers of M Engineering has like the half mile record in a 720, and it's like has 1,500 horsepower, and it was like 200 and I want to say 20 or something miles an hour. That's 60 miles an hour faster than I was going. In this distance.
So let me give you some perspective. AZ Cycle Parts out here.
Oh yeah, I've seen the videos.
So yeah, Mark Rao. I was actually just with Mark over the weekend at an event. Right, he's got two twin turbo STOs. He's got his purple one that's his street build that's 1,700 horsepower.
Selling junk razor parts did well, and then moved into the junk car parts.
Mark does great,
Yeah.
and it's funny because I always give Mark a hard time because every time I think I'm fast or I have a cool build, Mark shows up and I'm just slow white trash.
One of those cars has 3,500
Yes.
horsepower.
So Mark just set the land speed record in a twin turbo V10, 268 and a half mile.
Yeah, that's bananas.
Yeah, terrifying. Absolutely, panic-inducing terrifying.
You know what? I probably wouldn't even. Is he driving them too?
So he drove. We just did an event this weekend. And he took the purple car out,
but he's the driver.
Yes.
Yeah, I would definitely put someone else in there. Be like, built the car in case you die.
Yeah, but that's
yeah.
So this is a Jaredism. I used this all the time when I was building like fast boats back in Ohio. But I always tell everybody it's either going to be awesome or very suddenly it's not going to be my problem anymore.
Right.
And I think that's kind of where Mark's at with it. And it's consistently awesome for him. He does very well with it. And that's all working with the guys from Underground Racing, where they build these phenomenal. I had the opportunity to kind of like take apart his purple STO when we were at the Creative Bespoke event over the weekend. Dude, the fab work and the build quality is unbelievable. I mean, don't get me wrong, you're paying for it, but you get what you pay for with those guys.
Would you get a Huracan if you had the opportunity, non-STO?
Versus an R8? Or
anything.
So if I was going to spend more money than I spent on an exotic car, I think the Huracan would be my go-to, right? Because again, you have the same kind of reliability, the same kind of aftermarket support that you have with the R8. But again, I mean, I'm a tuner nerd from the 90s, right? I care about aftermarket support. I care about bolting on dumb parts and doing hood rat shit with my friends. Like that's what I want to do. So if I'm looking for an out of the box, what is the best supercar I can get that I'm just going to drive around and enjoy? Yeah, probably not. I'm probably looking at some of the McLaren stuff.
See, I would not. I'm just not a Huracan fan as far as me owning one. The parts and aftermarket support is there. But in general, I don't like. I've driven a couple. I would get an STO. I think it's because it brings out like different lines and everything. I just think the Huracan, whether it's the original ones or the Evo, or Performante, for some reason it's just driving them because of that window. And I've had the 12C, I've had the 570, and I never had the R8. Rob had the R8, and that was supercharged. I drove that; it was fast as shit. I don't.
Rob's car is actually the reason I started with a supercharger before I went twin turbo.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I'm watching your YouTube videos. I actually went with the same supercharger Rob had because of the way you guys talked about it.
That car was pretty amazing. What's crazy is there's so many people that are doing that. I mean, back then, when you talk about, Huracan twin turbo kits and stuff like that, you had really as Underground came out of nowhere. And then I think there was another company that was also trying to build them on Ferraris too, right? I mean, you had
Dallas Performance.
That's right. Yeah. Because I used to sell Dallas Performance and AMS, the little dongles so they could flash those transmissions. Well, before Mitch was doing his thing too. But yeah,
shout out to Mitch from M Engineering, by the way. He's also Mitch from Dyno Spectrum, and he saved my ass when we had a locked DCM on my R8. So I appreciate you, Mitch. Love you, dude.
Mitch is a great human being. For some reason, it's like that, and there's not that many of those cars, but there's so many people trying to fight for that market and building these twin turbo kits and whatnot. But there's only 2 supercharger manufacturers for that V10 R8 or Huracan engine.
Yeah, well, so you've got Nick at VF, right? Which, I mean, that is the benchmark for the supercharger.
Yeah, I've ran their superchargers and BMW, stuff like that. Yeah, by far
and
the best.
Customer service wise, I mean, those guys are, the product is fantastic. For me, and again, you guys were a big motivation for when I did the other guy's supercharger. But for me, the biggest thing with the other guy's supercharger was Nick uses that Magnuson blower, and it's sort of capped out. And my original thought process was, okay, well, if I do one of the kits, there's a couple of other guys that use the same Whipple setup that the company we won't talk about uses. But I liked the concept of the Whipple because it was a little bit more efficient. It ran a little bit cooler, and we could bump the boost up and make a little bit more power.
See, I thought those engines, you could only run 6-7 PSI in there.
Oh, no, it'll take 14. So, yeah,
it's probably your fuel system and the cooling, everything else.
Well, and that's the biggest thing. I was talking a little bit about the hodgepodge of a kit, right? So we used the B-Rogue manifold. We swapped out to Zona Rotaturbos, which is tile. So that way it's oil lubricated and water cooled. But I'm using all AMS fuel setup. So twin AMS pumps in tank, rails, AMS FPR, and then their intake manifold girdles, right? So you don't have the expansion and the blowout from backfires. Yeah, it's a genius little setup that AMS put together on that. But we're doing all of that on the B-Rogue kit, which is honestly, if it wasn't for Nico from Plus Calibration, which is the same guys like Nico from Lux Performance up in Scottsdale, this car would not be where it's at today, right? The guy, he's so meticulous when it comes to details that he kind of helped me piece together the right components to do what we're going to do. And so this car is so overkill at this point. The car is built to handle 1,600 horsepower on a stock motor as far as turbos, intercooler sizing, and fuel setup.
I've never had a car over that. That was the fastest car I had, I think, was the 997 Turbo, which did 200 miles an hour in the mile. That was 2010, right? And then McLaren's, it's called 700 horsepower. I've never had a 1,000 horsepower car, and I was actually thinking about that. What if I just sold everything and just built like a 1,200 horsepower car?
All right.
Well, even if I did that, is most of the time, I guess you could hammer it on an off-ramp. Unless you're going into an event or you find some place in the middle of nowhere. Really hard to use.
Well, so that's what's interesting, right? So I overbuilt this car as far as fuel. I overbuilt the car as far as turbos. But it's a rear-wheel drive car, so nobody makes a billet gear set for it. So I have the opportunity to do like the Datsun clutch packs and stuff like that, and that's what we're doing for the Trans, that and basically a TCM tune. But ultimately, the Trans is really only good to handle 1,100 horsepower driving. But ultimately,
so it's the Trans that's a limitation.
The Trans is 100% the limitation. And there's some guys building some great transmissions out there. Sheepy Race builds a killer Trans, but I'd have to convert to all-wheel drive because it's a totally different gear set.
Isn't the two-wheel drive R8 very limited? Like they only produced, and not like limited in like you got like 1 of 10 SVJs, but didn't they only produce a certain amount of these two-wheel drives, so they're hard to find?
So originally, yes. And then, in 2018, they released the RWS, and there was 999 of those cars that came out. And it was inexpensive. It was a track-based car. Flash forward to 2021, and they killed the base model R8, and they only had the Plus car, which was the all-wheel drive 610 horsepower, and then they made the 580 horsepower rear-wheel drive car.
Right.
And so that it actually became a little bit more commonplace because it basically became the quote-unquote entry-level car. Like when I bought my R8, I bought it with no exterior carbon because I knew I was going to do a bunch of Carbonero.
Right.
I did buy the nicer seats and the B&O stereo because I wanted a little bit more, creature comforts. I am in my 40s. But all in, I spec'd that car and ordered it from Audi for $179.
You can't even touch some of these cars for that price. What? That's a 22?
It's a 22, and I ordered it from the factory.
So here's a funny one: is I've only bought a couple brand new Porsche cars, and then I bought a brand new spec'd it 2014 991 turbo, and the MSRP on I didn't do some extra stitching, and I didn't do a sunroof because I knew we were going to put a roll bar in it, and I did the center locks because I wanted to have center lock wheels, and that type of stuff. In fact, that was one of the times I had Cody, MHT Cody, make some niche wheels for me on that thing. That car spec'd out 991 turbo before the Turbo S, $154,000.
Okay.
A 992 turbo or Turbo S is what? $275,000
to start.
Yeah, the price of getting in some of these cars now is just, it's almost like worse than the housing market.
So it's funny, right? When I bought my R8, I originally had started, I wanted a 992 GT3. Mm-hmm. I mean, I'm talking base spec, no carbon, Shark Blue, 6-speed manual, right?
Right.
Like MSRP was 174 the way I wanted the car.
Mm-hmm.
And so I had walked into Porsche. Now at the time,
oh, well, that's where it went wrong.
100%. So at the time, like I was driving, and I still have this car. I daily drive a bagged 21 RS5.
Uh-huh.
Love this car. But I walked in, I drove in my RS5. I'm wearing like a bluesy Submariner Rolex. And I walk in and took me 30 minutes to get somebody to acknowledge my existence.
Well, just even try, you could have been wearing a Speedo, but it's just trying to get the actual car. Like, cause I got an allocation for mine.
Well, see, and that's the problem I had, right? So when I finally got to talk to someone, like, this is what I want to do. I'm paying cash for the car. Like, let's do this. Yeah, you're gonna have to buy a GT4 first, and we can order you one. You'll be about 40 over, and then you can trade the GT4 in on the GT3 when it's ready. But you're gonna be about 50 over on that. So you're talking net in. I'm gonna be 90 over on a $174,000 car. So I left dejected. I was feeling just gross and sick, right? So I go over, I'm actually heading over to Audi Connection, Cincinnati, Ohio. If any of your viewers are out that direction, super mod friendly, great dealership, have always taken care of me. Shout out to Mike Reichert, killer sales guy. But he took care of me. I got the first and only RS5, like the B9.5 RS5 coupe allocation for the state of Ohio. And they sold me at MSRP, no mark.
I think more and more dealers, have to start abiding by the MSRP thing. Now, I had 992 GT3, got the allocation, paid MSRP. Mine was $200,000, for the one that I got. A couple of the cars previous to that, I bought used. They're one owner, but I had bought another car from them. I bought that Taycan Turbo through them. But now it's such a game of you have to buy that amount of cars to get said allocation. The interesting thing I learned when talking with one of them is that they will not sell you, or they will enforce selling to you at MSRP now, the dealerships that want to continue their good relationship. So they will say, here's the car. But what they do is if you bought a car and you sell it back to them, they don't have to enforce MSRP on used cars. So if I buy a GT3, let's call it for $200,000, and one of those guys, I drive it for a month, I sell it back to them for $210,000. They can go out there now and sell it for $250,000.
Yep.
So
that was actually a big thing when the 991s were available and the people were trying to order the 992 GT3s originally.
Was it?
They were going crazy over retail.
Yeah, that car I think is really messed up the new car market because you can't actually get it at all. And I don't know if it's like that wanting to get a Lamborghini. I know Ferrari's like that, right? I don't know if Audi, my RS6 I bought as a one owner, but if I wanted to get the new RS4 wagon, right? I don't know if I think those came out or coming out.
So it was originally they were going to do the RS4 and the B10, but the way they're doing it now, basically all the even number cars are going to be EVs, all the odd numbers are going to be ICE. So it's going to be the RS5 Avant here in the US, which I'm fighting trying to get an allocation for now.
So I don't know if they're still, dealers are still doing that where they're marking them up, but I think eventually, as a lot of the manufacturers are like, we don't want you to market.
Yeah.
It's play your favorites all day long, right? But I think there should be some control on that. Like I was actually talking to somebody this morning, is the Porsche 911 ST, which ultimately is a 992 GT3 RS without the wing, without the aero. And he was telling me how this guy had to put 250 grand down, can only lease the car because Porsche doesn't want them to be able to flip the car. And he had to, besides paying his lease payment, actually had to put down another, I don't know, this could sound really crazy, but 300 grand for something else. But ultimately they're trying to control being able to have these people flip these cars. Because, the price of the GT3 RS market right now, it's gone down. But when that car first came out and you had one, they're selling these for $550.
Yeah.
Now you can see them for like $399, $400, like that price. And I mean, I configured one, it was 300 grand. So I guess in the scheme of things, paying 100 grand over isn't as bad as paying 200 grand over, but it's still ridiculous.
Well, and so Porsche is really big on that. Ferrari is huge on that. And you have to own X number of cars. You have to have X relationship. And it's a lot like working with an AD with Rolex, right? If they call you on some watch that you really don't want, but they have it, if you want to get the call on the watch you actually want, you've got to go in and buy this thing.
Right.
And, Ferrari is very much that way. This is where I think McLaren is appealing to a new generation of buyer, because McLaren sells you at MSRP and they just want to sell your car and they're good with it, right? And Audi was very much the same way. Going back to my R8, I walked in to buy some touch-up paint for my RS5 because the car's bagged. I had scraped up the front bumper a little bit because I am white trash. And, my sales guy pulled me over. He's like, hey, I know you were talking about maybe doing something bigger at some point. I just got a rear-wheel drive R8 in. Do you want to test drive it?
Well, that's unheard of right there.
100%. And they pulled this car off the showroom floor, handed me the keys, right? Yeah. Took this thing around the block, pulled back in. Mike goes, well, I'm like, hate the color. He goes, cool, let's order you a car. And right then and there, on the spot, ordered me a car with $5 grand down, like just as a deposit to hold.
Yeah.
And sold me the car at MSRP. And I financed that. Now, to be fair, I financed that car during COVID, so it was a whole different market. But I wound up putting like 100 down. So I financed basically 80 grand all in at 1.9%.
Yeah. You're dumb not to do that. It's free money.
100%, right? But I mean, you want to talk about the level of customer service and the way those guys always, they never gave me a hard time about the modifications on either car. Actually, when I ordered the B9.5 RS5, nobody had ever seen one before. I was getting the very first one. So those guys at the Audi Connection, I hope this doesn't get back and bite them and get them in trouble, but I wanted to take some specs and some measurements to spec out the air ride because I bagged the car with 1,000 miles. Like I got the car, broke it in, and immediately went in for air. But so about 2 months before my car got there, they let me pull a B9.5 A5 into the garage there and start taking stuff apart and taking measurements. So I could spec out how I wanted to lay the truck out, how I wanted to, because I did all like steel braided lines for the air ride, what the line lengths were going to look like, what kind of positioning we had to do and stuff like that. And they actually let me do it at the dealership.
I wonder how well a version, it would be like To Catch a Predator, but for like car dealerships. So we'd walk in there with like secret cameras. This would go on like TikTok too and just make videos of just seeing how different dealerships treat you or mark you up on stuff. And just make an entire channel of that. Like if I had nothing else to do in my life, doing things like this to like ruin people that shouldn't be.
Well, yeah, because you're souring the enthusiast experience, right? Like it turns off the next generation of car guy or car gal because they get treated like shit trying to buy a car.
When I went to buy my Raptor, I went to the dealership over here in Gilbert, and on a 23 Raptor. There's no R. I didn't say R. I said Raptor. Okay, they wanted to charge 15 grand over, and I was like, no,
dude, they're everywhere.
Give me a break. Yeah, it's either I can drive 5 minutes or I can drive 25 minutes to get this. So Okay, so thank you for watching another Vivid Truth podcast. You've got Jared and this is Dan. We appreciate it. We'll see you at the next one.
Thank you.